If I asked you who owns the Dallas Cowboys, you'd probably say Jerry Jones. If I asked you who owns the Chiefs, you'd have an answer for that too. But if I asked you who owns Texas football, you'd probably stop for a second, think about it, and then realize you don't actually know. Because nobody does. Which is strange, because Texas football is now worth roughly $2.46 billion, almost exactly what Steve Cohen paid for the New York Mets. We're not talking about the entire university or even the athletic department. That's the estimated value of one college football program. So here's the question. If a college football program is already worth professional sports money, why can't anyone buy it? A decade ago, the idea of a college football program being worth billions of dollars would have sounded ridiculous. These aren't professional franchises with owners or shareholders, so where does it all come from? It all comes down to business. Playing football ain't the problem. The thing is, the biggest programs are filling 100,000 seat stadiums every Saturday, selling merchandise across the country, signing sponsorship deals, bringing in donor money, and cashing massive television checks. Because that's where the real money comes from. Live sports are one of the few things people still make time to watch in real time. That's incredibly valuable to broadcasters. Every new TV deal has pumped more money into college football, turning programs like Texas, Ohio State, and Notre Dame into brands that rival professional franchises in commercial value. To put that into perspective, Texas alone is valued at roughly $2.46 billion. That's worth more than the average MLS club and nearly 10 times the average WNBA franchise. Sure, it's still nowhere near the NFL, where the Seahawks just sold for $9.6 billion, but that's not really the point. The point is, college football isn't becoming a billion-dollar business. At the very top, it already is. And for years, that wasn't a problem. It was just proof that the sport was thriving. Then, almost overnight, that value became the answer to a very expensive new question. College football ran on a pretty simple business model for decades. Schools made billions, players didn't get paid directly. But all that changed in June 2025 with the House v. NCAA settlement.
Now, it's being called one of the biggest shifts in college sports history. A $2.8 billion settlement between the NCAA and former student athletes will soon allow schools to pay players directly,
creating an annual revenue sharing pool of roughly $20.5 million per school. That number is set to grow over the next decade, and the settlement also included nearly $2.8 billion in payback from former athletes. For the players, it was a historic win. For the schools, it was a brand new bill. Now, the biggest programs had to fund professional-sized payrolls while still paying for coaches, facilities, recruiting, and everything else that comes with running an elite football program. Making money wasn't enough anymore. They needed more of it. And whenever a billion-dollar industry suddenly needs billions more, people with money start paying attention. The question was no longer what these programs were worth, it was whether someone could invest in them. Of course, not the university. They're buying the business built around its football program. Texas is the most valuable program in college football, followed by Ohio State and Notre Dame. And those rankings aren't just about winning games. They're built on revenue, brand power, fan support, media exposure, and sustained success on the field. More than anything else, they're built on television. The Big Ten's media deal is worth nearly $7 billion, while the SEC's agreement with ESPN is worth another $3 billion. Add in the ACC, the Big 12, and the expanded college football playoff, and it's easy to see why the biggest brands continue pulling away from the rest of the sport. That's what investors are buying into. Not a locker room or a stadium, but one of the strongest sports businesses in America, backed by decades of fan loyalty and billions in predictable media revenue. And as it turns out, they haven't just been watching from the sidelines. They've already started making their move. The surprising part is, investors aren't waiting for college football to change. They're already here. Nobody has bought a college football program, of course not. But they have started investing in the business around one. Take Utah. In 2025, the university partnered with Otro Capital to launch Crimson Brand Partners, opening the commercial side of Utah athletics to outside investment. They didn't sell the football team, they opened the door for investors to grow the business around it, from sponsorships and media rights to licensing and fan experiences. And Utah isn't the only one. The Big 12 has teamed up with firms like Redbird Capital and Weatherford Capital to explore new commercial opportunities. Then you have the billionaire boosters like Phil Knight at Oregon and Dave Portnoy at Michigan, who already changed the trajectory of programs through massive financial backing. None of them own a college football team, but every one of them has shown there's more than one way to shape one. Closer than most people think. This isn't some brand new idea that showed up last week. As far back as 2024, Smash Capital, a firm led by former Disney executives Kevin Mayer, Tom Staggs, Evan Rector, and former Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick, was already pitching a very different future for college football. The proposal called for a 70-team Super League backed by as much as $9 billion in private capital, with participating schools projected to receive roughly $25 million in additional revenue over a 12-year period. And here's the important part. This wasn't a debate happening on social media. More than 25 Power Conference athletic directors reportedly sat through the presentation. No teams were sold, no Super League was created, but one thing became pretty clear. Private investment had already made its way from internet speculation to university boardrooms. If private investment becomes the norm, not everybody wins. The 10 most valuable college football programs are now worth nearly $18.7 billion combined. Meanwhile, many ACC and Big 12 schools are still valued somewhere between $100 and $300 million. And that's because investment follows success. Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia already bring in massive audiences, premium medium value, and national brands. Those are the programs investors are most likely to back, giving them even more money for recruiting, facilities, and player spending. That's how the gap gets even bigger. The richest programs attract more investment, become even more competitive, and keep pulling away from everybody else. College football has never been financially equal. Private investment could make sure it never is. That brings us back to where we started. Can you actually buy a college football team? Today, the answer is still no. Supporters argue that outside investment is simply the next step in college football's evolution. Schools already operate billion-dollar businesses, players are already getting paid, and more capital could help programs keep up with rising costs of competing. Even Ohio State head coach Ryan Day has called for a much higher salary cap, showing just how quickly the economics of the sport have changed. But there are still some very real obstacles. Most powerhouse programs are public, non-profit universities. Selling ownership stakes could put that status at risk. Penn State has estimated it could owe more than $13 million a year in taxes if it lost its exemption. Congress is paying attention too. The bipartisan Protect College Sports Act of 2026 would prohibit schools from selling ownership stakes to private equity firms, hedge funds, or foreign investors. The bill has support in both chambers and has already been endorsed by President Donald Trump, but it still hasn't become law. And that's why this moment feels so different. Financially, college football has never looked more like professional sports. Legally, it's still trying not to become one. For now, that wall is still standing, but players are already being paid. Investors are already working with athletic departments, and some of the biggest names in finance have already drawn up plans for a privately funded future. College football has already become a business. The only question left is whether the last barrier separating it from professional sports can hold, or if it's only a matter of time before someone finally buys a college football team.